Hello, and welcome to the Lore of Braunhaven. Today, we're going to talk about the conflict that happened between the town of Braunhaven and the Elves of the Solvanus Forest. So, uh, you know, Estevar Braun was made Burgermeister of Braunhaven, and a negative 300 Relvar Braun um, was given a title of nobility by the Imperial Crown. And so you've got the town of Braunhaven and uh, the fairly newly constructed Castle Braun, and the Braun family's meteoric rise up through the social ranks due to their um, financial empire, the brilliance of creating or building the Braunhaus coaching inn at the confluence of the Imperial Tradeway and the Eastern Tradeway. And so, with that, you know, the Imperial Tradeway and the Eastern Tradeway and the Imperial Port to the south, um, they became very rich. There's just no other way to put that. And this this was a boom time. The town of Braunhaven and the outlying region around Castle Braun, probably within, I would say, probably around 24 miles of that whole area, um, grew very rapidly. Number of farms and probably small villages, with, of course, the town of Braunhaven being the main center of civilization, even as, I mean, compared to Glauschein or the Imperial Port, Braunhaven is relatively small. But at its height, it was um, quite the sight to see. Um, it was burgeoning on the verge of going from what you would call a town to a full city. They never did get to the point where they were going to build a wall, although it was discussed, making it a fortified town. And so during this time of expansion, of course, the people of the region were doing a lot of logging and, of course, hunting. And of course, the closest set of trees would have been from the edge of the Solvanus Forest. And because of this rapid growth, they were advancing deeper into the forest than the high elves of the Solvanus Forest would have liked. Now, the Solvanus Forest, it has been the home to the high elves for many years, and for pretty much as long as the entire region has existed. And somewhere in the Solvanus Forest, and this map is a stylized um, estimation, but the elves have their capital city, uh, there's Wadelek, in the Solvanus Forest. Now, the Solvanus Forest, the deeper you get into the forest, there is a fairy-like Dwemer that is applied. The forest becomes more denser and denser and more maze-like the deeper into the forest you get. Um, that of that Dwemer, of course, is affected by the trees themselves, and there are. It is said, and well, it's pretty much known. There are numerous portals in the forest that connect to the Fey realm, and that has an effect on the forest as well. So unless you are specifically invited or traveling with one of the high elves of the Solvanus Forest, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to find Derzwadalek. You're more likely to be wandering forever in the forest, or meeting one of the number of uh, Fey-like denizens that kind of pop in and out of these portals between the Prime Plane and the Fey realm. But nevertheless, I mean, if you've got less trees, then of course this offers less protection because that Dwemer shrinks, and so the elves were, you know, um, recognizably upset. And in negative 173, this broke into a full blown. It's not a full blown war. It's a skirmish. A lot of historians call it a full blown war, but it it was not. There were numerous numerous skirmishes between elven rangers and the I guess you could say militia of Braunhaven. The townsfolk of the town of Braunhaven had maintained their own militia. The small villages usually had, about 5 or 6, and these militiamen that were not anything more than just uh, volunteer farmers and peasants that had um, taken up the uh, taken up a sword or an axe, probably more likely an axe, to defend their homesteads and their region. But this this logging effort, it started with a party of Solvanus Rangers um, attacking a group of loggers as they were logging the forest, and this went on uh, for some time. Minor skirmishes, and it wasn't. It wasn't a bloodless affair or even a war of the words. There were some deaths on both sides, and finally, this it was getting to a point where um, evidently the humans of Braunhaven weren't getting the hint, or they were digging in their heels, and the elves were um, had finally gotten to a point where they'd had enough, and they were just going to raise the town and the humans from the landscape. And this was recognized by the Braun family, and it was actually Gilda Braun that came forth, and by this time she was known as the Duchess of Braunhaven. Duchess Gilda Braun came forth and started to. Was it Gilda Braun? Maybe I'm wrong with that. No, that sounds right. Yeah, Gilda. Um, she kind of did a negotiation, and she got the elves to um, basically sit down at the table and air their grievances like the civilized folk that they are, and and then the people of Braunhaven. She calmed them down. Now, one of the things to remember, the high elves of Salvanus, they're they're your typical high elf. They are very arrogant. Think they are better than the humans, and one of their problems is that for the most part, elven politics are very strange. The high elves think that they are honestly better than the wood elves, and the wood elves, for their nature, are more nomadic, almost. Uh, well, they're leaning towards that whole barbarian state of things, but the wood elves do have small settlements. They are generally very small, but they most wood elves are very transient. They won't stay in one settlement for very long, and they kind of move on. There are a couple, like I said, there are a couple of well-known wood elf settlements, but the wood elves are much more likely to be the ones to say, we've had enough of this, and let's just kill them all. Whereas the high elves, um, Gildebrand played to their arrogance in that, basically telling them that they are obviously smarter and better, and so you know the rise of violence in this situation isn't becoming of them or their talents, and so she played to their ego, and was successful in getting them to sit down. And so there was an agreement made, and the none of the biggest downside of this is that none of this was really formalized on paper. There was a treaty, a verbal treaty between the elves and the people of Braunhaven, and essentially what it boiled down to is that the people of Braunhaven would they were going to be allowed to do some logging at the edge of the forest, um, but to not delve too deep. And the elves didn't really formalize, well, what constitutes the edge of the forest. And the thought is on that is that, according to the elves, I mean, if you because of the Dweemers placed on the forest, you'll know if you've gone too deep. And so this protected much more of the old growth, and in turn, the humans agreed that they would not only would they only stick to the edges of the forest, should they need to, but they would also replant, and they wouldn't overlog. They're not going to, you know, strip mine the entire forest. And so there was this verbal agreement and a handshake that was made, and that ended up ceasing the hostilities between Braunhaven and the Solvanus Elves. The Wood Elves were never completely satisfied with this agreement. Unlike the High Elves, the Wood Elves live in many of these smaller patches of forest, and they don't have as many of the protective dweemers that are placed on their villages and woods. Um, so they no, it didn't work out as well for them, and they realized this. Although the humans of Braunhaven and particularly Gildebrand, for their part, they had the integrity enough to move in that direction anyways. They weren't going to overlog anything. And so a lot of the newer growth trees along the edge of the forest are logged. Fallen trees are taken first. They basically have a very green and ecological foresight in how their building goes with the Braunhaven region. The Solvanus Elves have honored, and the Wood Elves, the Solvanus Elves have honored their end of the agreement to the current age. But for the most part, the Elves of Derswadelek have have become more insular. The High Elves have kind of retreated in, and it is not extremely common to see high elves of the Solvanus Forest uh, in any great number um, out in the Braunhaven region. For the most part, they stay in the forest. There are, of course, it's not like they're unknown. There are individual elves that do leave and decide that they want to see the world, or are sent out as I guess you could say they're sent out as scouts to bring word back, but it's not really phrased like that. It's more of a, if you're going to go out and experience the world, bring back news of what is going on. And for their part, of course, the elves, um, being of the natural wizardly nature, they have their own means of scrying and things of that nature. So they're not in the dark. But the wood elves, on the other hand, they have maintained the peace to a point, but they are a lot more hot-headed than the high elves, and there are still some minor skirmishes. If you travel into a wood that's too close to one of their camps or settlements, um, likely you're going to be met with a unpleasant experience, at least at first. So the wood elves are a little bit more testy about things than the high elves are. but it was Gildebrand that kind of cemented this whole thing, and and in my opinion, I think the High Elves probably would have steamrolled much of Braunhaven. They just have too much magical power and abilities. When you're talking about the average um, elven fighter, being able to cast spells as well, that doesn't bode well for a militia that's made up of farmers. And so she kind of she was smart enough to kind of see the writing on the wall and smooth things over, at least to a point. This did end up having the effect of more or less curtailing a bit of the expansion and construction, and so for that, the town ended up doing some mining on the west side of the Great River across the Barbarous Trade Bridge. Um, One perfect example of that was a bit of a um, mining and I was going to say gold rush. It is a bit of a gold rush because, of course, there was precious metals and gems found. But the town of Stagholm was was founded on the west side of the Great River and at the base, very like I would say the base of the Skelos Mountains, but it's very at the edge. Like it is at what would be known as the frost line. In fact, on the northwestern end of the town, the trail actually starts to become rimed in frost and snow, and even in the middle of summer, cold winds can blow down off the mountains into Stagham and bring with it snowy weather in middle of summer. And so it's very the weather in the Scouse Mountains can be very unpredictable. And so yeah, Stagham kind of became a prospector's town, and of course because of the elements, it had a burgeoning trapping industry as well for furs and things of that nature. And so Stagham is still there today. It is a very small village, and most of the individuals that claim to be part of the population of Stagham don't live in the village proper. They have cabins and whatnot in the outlying mountainous regions, and the people from Stagham are very rustic and individualistic. They don't want help from the empire. They don't. If they never saw an imperial legionnaire, they would be perfectly happy. They um, they are very prideful on their ability to make everything that they need with very little import from the outside. And that's not to say that they don't have import. They do. A lot of stuff is now imported from Braunhaven, or with trade with merchants that still use the Eastern Tradeway. But um, there's only a couple of trips per year that the purveyor of the general goods store there um, tends to he makes two trips a year to bring back stuff. The little luxury items. Just because you are prideful of being able to make everything you need doesn't mean that you don't want a new um, a new knife or um, a pretty dress or what have you. There are luxury items. And so Staghome was kind of created during this boom rush for quarrying stone, and a lot of the expansion from that point forward for Braunhaven ended up being made of stone. They did cobblestone streets, and future construction of the buildings were more out of stone, and used less timber. So there was that effect. And it was also kind of during this time that they built, well, they kind of expanded. There was a small church, of course, that was built almost immediately, and they called it the All Faiths Temple. And the All Faiths Temple in Braunhaven uh, really caters to um, all faiths, literally. That it's in its name. It caters to both the old gods and the council of the 12 elder gods. And so they have kept that, and it was built on a site where they had actually delved underground, and that became known as the Undercroft of the All Faiths Temple. And in the Undercroft, they essentially built tombs, and the church was formed on or built atop that, and it has been during this time that All Faiths Temple was greatly expanded, built into the stone Gothic structure that it is in the current age. So that is Braunhaven. They're what is known as the War of the Elves, and next time we will talk about. We're getting close to the current age now. The coming of the demon plague in the year -002. The first signs of sickness, and what the demon plague is, and what its symptoms are, and we'll pick that up next week. Thank you for watching.